hitting the record here so we can later post this on our CSEC site. And I am thrilled to introduce you to Nick Wagner. As you know, today's session is on engaging the newly baptized, and it's a subject so near and dear to our hearts. And like many of you, I have participated on our parish RCIA team, and I've had the privilege to sponsor a number of candidates through this process, and yet have also experienced the challenge of keeping these individuals engaged in their faith community and to keep coming back. So today's session will hopefully provide some ideas and strategies to increase that level of connection and engagement for these individuals, to in essence deepen their involvement and their conversion experience. So today's speaker comes with a wealth of information and experience in this topic. As co-founder of Team RCIA, Nick, along with his wife Diana, have endeavored to research and provide strategies to do just that. Nick shared with me that while he is a cradle Catholic, his true conversion didn't happen until he was 17, when he was invited by classmates to join a faith-sharing group. It was a few years later that the actual RCIA process came into being, and Nick saw this as a high-value process for deepening an individual's conversion. So Nick and his wife have been active in providing workshops and classes on how to get people involved and published 2 books on their process and strategies. One for catechetical leaders called The Way of Faith in 2008, by a supplement book for candidates and catechumens called The Heart of Faith in 2009. And at the end of this, Nick will talk about his website, which hosts an ongoing blog and has many resources. So Nick, we are so pleased to have you here joining us. Please help me welcome Nick Wagner. Nick?
Well, thanks so much, Stephanie. I'm really excited to be here, and it is great to see all of these folks from all over the country. As Stephanie mentioned, she's been part of our RCI team and experienced the joy of seeing folks come into the church, and also I think the struggle or the difficulty of seeing some of those folks not come back, not participate after they went through the initiation process. And that happened to me. My first job in professional ministry, I was in my 20s. I was in a parish in Minneapolis, and that's where I first had a taste of the way the catechumenate process would be run. If you had all the ministries in place and did it kind of according to the vision of the book, they had all that going when I started work there, and somebody else was in charge of it. I helped with the liturgies, but I was not in charge. I just got to kind of watch and learn and see how it went. And we had this one young man who was part of the process, and he had been in one of the communist countries. This was still when the Iron Curtain was up, and because of the politics of the country he came from, he had never been baptized, although his parents were raised Catholic, and they always wanted him to be Catholic. So when he came to us, he'd never been baptized. He was all excited about his newfound freedom, and he was excited about learning the faith, and he went through the process. He seemed very dedicated, very committed, and then we had a huge baptism at the Easter Vigil, and he came back like 1 or 2 Sundays after that, and we never saw him again. And I don't know if maybe he moved on to another parish and he stayed active in that parish. I really don't know what happened. He didn't stay in touch with us and let us know. But I've always worried ever since then that maybe what we did for him was not sufficient, and he never really got it about what living the faith would be like, since he hadn't been raised living the faith. So since then, I've been struggling with this idea about what happens with the newly baptized, and how do we keep them engaged? How do we keep them involved in the process? How do we keep them involved in the church and active? And some of your questions that or some of your challenges that you've listed there kind of echo that. Somebody said that their own parish is not very welcoming to new members, and so so new folks don't really feel involved. Someone had a question about how to keep the new folks excited. Someone asked about how to get the neophytes to come back after baptism, which is exactly the struggle I had with this young man. So I want to talk about some of those issues which I think are common in a lot of parishes. So the things that you've mentioned, things that I've heard from other parishes are things like missing neophytes after the vigil. And the thing about folks not feeling excited about being involved is that in a lot of our parishes, Easter season seems like a letdown instead of a high point. We spend all of Lent getting ready for a great big Easter celebration, and then the 50 days are kind of a letdown after that. If you're familiar with the catechumenate process, you know that the U.S. bishops have asked that we extend the mystagogical period beyond the 50 days to an entire year after the neophytes have been baptized. And when I talk with some teams about that, they have trouble just handling the 50 days. And then when we start talking about a year-long process for the neophytes, that becomes almost overwhelming. So as we go along, if these resonate with you, if you have other challenges you want to raise issues about, or any kind of questions at all, go ahead and type them in the chat box there, and we'll try to get to them as we can. But let's take a look. Let's start with these questions, these challenges, and look at what the rite itself says. Now, if you have a copy of your rites book, you may not have it handy, but write this down to look at later. Paragraphs 244 to 251 in the rite talk about what the period of mystagogy is supposed to be about. And so this 50 days, specifically these 50 days from the Easter Vigil until Pentecost, the rite says it's a time to grow in community. So when we look at those 50 days, we have to ask what's going on in our community that leads to growth. It's also a time to grasp the Paschal mystery. The rite says this, and it just kind of lays out there like that. And I call this kind of church speak, because if you say to any brand new Catholic, what does it mean to grasp the Paschal mystery? Or say to even a long-time Catholic, what does it mean to grasp the Paschal mystery? If you had to define that, what would that mean to you? And I've been in rooms with veteran team members before, and I've said to them, just define for me what is the Paschal mystery. And if you just try to think about that yourself, how would you define the Paschal mystery? I'll bet a lot of you are saying something along the lines of the life, death, passion, resurrection, passion, death, and resurrection of Jesus. And that's true as far as it goes, but if you think about it, trying to say those words to someone who's never really encountered the Paschal mystery, or is just coming to faith, who is just brand new to the faith, those words are not going to have a lot of meaning. That's more church speak to them. They don't, we understand it because we've lived it, but they don't really understand what that means. And so we have to talk more about what we mean by Paschal mystery in our daily lives. So a way to get at this is to just look back at your own life in the last week. In the last week, how have you died to yourself? In the last week, how have you experienced resurrection? In the last week, how have you made a sacrifice or experienced someone making a sacrifice for you? And how has that led to new life? And so now in the reason the rite says these 50 days are the time to grasp that Paschal mystery is because the catechumens have spent their entire catechumenate sort of hearing about the Paschal mystery from the lens of the Word, of the proclamation of the Paschal mystery, the stories of Paschal mystery in our salvation history, and now that Paschal mystery is lived out liturgically with the real presence and them becoming part of that presence through the sacrifice of the Mass, through participating for the first time fully in the Paschal mystery as we ritualize it at Sunday liturgy. And so they're going to have now the spiritual ability, the lived experience of participating in that Paschal mystery with the community and connecting that to their lives. And that's going to be our job, is to help them do that, help them see how that's experienced in the Mass and how to connect it with their daily lives. And that's the grasping part that has to happen here. If they're catechumens that have been baptized now, they haven't yet had that grasping experience, that total integration of the Paschal mystery into their lives. And that's a really important, significant part of this mystagogical period. And then the way that we do that, the way that we make that connection, the Rite says, we make this Paschal mystery part of our lives by meditation on the gospel, which by now the neophytes are experts at because that's what they've been doing for their whole catechumenate. They do that also by sharing in the Eucharist, which is new for them. So they're going to need some kind of reflection, some kind of a way of incorporating that sharing the Eucharist now as a significant part of their lives. And then by using all of that, that word and Eucharist to go out from the Mass to do works of charity, works of justice, works of live the apostolic life. So that's all compressed in paragraph 244 of the RCIA. That's the very first paragraph that talks about this period of mystagogy, and it kind of lays out the plan there. But as I said, if you're reading that paragraph or you read it later, it can sound a little like church speak. So you have to break it apart and really reflect on what is it that this period is asking us to do? What's our agenda? What's the call to us there? So that's a little dense, a lot to take on right at the beginning. So again, if you want to clarify something or expand on that a little bit, go ahead and type that in the chat box. But meantime, I'm going to go on to the next slide. This process of kind of experiencing the Paschal mystery through Word and Eucharist, Word and Sacrament. There's a Latin catchphrase, a Latin saying that describes all that. It goes lex orandi, lex credende, lex vivendi. And many of you have heard that, I'm sure. It translates as we pray, so we believe, so we live. So what's going to happen for these neophytes is they're going to be praying now the full Eucharist, which is going to be a new experience for them, and that's going to solidify and deepen their belief. The way that they pray in worship is going to inform and form their belief. And their belief is going to lead to an enhanced lifestyle. The prayer leads to belief, leads to lifestyle. That's the dynamic that's going on here. Well, in every Sunday Mass, really, but especially during this mystagogical period. Then to say that the main setting then for mystagogy is the Sundays of the Easter season. So think about that for a minute. One of the complaints that people have is that folks don't come back for mystagogy. Well, if they're coming to Sunday Mass, now I realize some of them aren't even doing that, but if they're coming to Sunday Mass, they're coming to the main settings of this post-baptismal period, this time of post-baptismal catechesis. So the main setting for this are those Sunday Masses of Easter. So when we say that then, we realize there are several things that maybe we've misunderstood about mystagogy, that we've gotten kind of a clouded vision of what mystagogy is. Sometimes we identify mystagogy as only that season, only those 50 days, because that's in a way kind of the way the RCIA defines it. And as I said, the U.S. bishops kind of want to break us out of that to say it's not just those 50 days, but it's the entire year after baptism. And if you think about the implications of that, if we're always having baptisms, which we are, maybe not in your parish, but we are in the next door parish or somewhere in the diocese, there's always baptisms going on, and so there's always a full year of mystagogy in the church, which means there's always a period of mystagogy in the church. It's not just one season, but it's kind of a lifestyle. It's a way of being. And mystagogy is not a session. It's not a class. It's not a thing that we schedule in room G of the hall or something. It's a way of being, a way of living out the gospel message that the catechumens have been focusing on throughout their entire catechumenate, and now are putting into full effect in this post-baptismal period. So therefore, mystagogy is not sporadic. It's not something we do once in a while or occasionally in the church, but it's something that's ongoing and something that takes place throughout the life of the church. Also, the section on mystagogy and post-baptismal catechesis in the Rite is very clear that mystagogy is not only for the newly baptized, that it is an experience for the entire church to grow in faith. It's a time for the entire church to experience this new birth that we've encountered with the neophytes. And so it's a time for the renewal of the entire church to get refounded in their baptismal promises and to get re-energized and re-excited about what it means to live the faith. And mystagogy is not a time for apologetics or explanation. I've run into things on the World Wide Web. You know, if you're surfing around about how places do their RCIA, don't do that. It'll shake your faith. But I tried this, and in some places they really got an entire sort of continuation of the catechism or something that's going on during these 50 days, and it's the grounding in the doctrines of our faith is what takes place in the catechumenate. And then the mystagogical period is really a living out of all that. That's where we learn more about the doctrines and teaching of our faith by actually living it out. So the mystagogical period is really not a time for apologetics. And finally, it's not a time for evaluation and critique. It's not really a time to say, oh, my catechumenate was not very exciting, or the Easter Vigil was kind of a letdown. It's more of a time, again, of saying, what is it that happened to me at the Vigil, and what's happening to me in these first few Sundays where I'm experiencing fullness of the Eucharist for the first time, and then what does that mean in my life, and how does it enhance and shape the way I'm living my life? So some of the objections that people raise, then they ask, well, if the Sunday Mass, especially the Masses of the Easter season, are the kind of the climax and the point and the main setting of this post-baptismal catechesis, what do we do if people are not at Mass? You know, what if they're not coming back to Mass? Well, one thing that's really true, I live in San Jose, and so the kind of tenor of folks here is, you know, all that Silicon Valley tech lifestyle. Everybody's got 3 or 4 calendars. They're all online. They're all interconnected. They're all looking at their iPhones or their iPads. Everybody's very busy all the time. And so one difficulty is maybe in the catechumenate period we haven't gotten on people's calendars. And so we got to let them know early on that they've got a calendar Sunday. That has to go on their calendars. They have to make it a priority. And for some people it's as simple as that. We just didn't make it clear that this is a priority that they have to schedule in. Then another difficulty is a discernment of readiness. You know, if you think back to that story I told about the young man from the communist country, I don't remember in our process with him if we ever really went through a real discernment process, if he was ready to move on to the rite of election, to go through Lent and through baptism. And so that discernment for readiness has to be an ongoing process, starting really in the inquiry period. And then in the inquiry period, we're discerning if they're ready to become catechumens. And then in the catechumenate period, throughout the catechumenate period, we're discerning readiness. Now, one thing that happens in a lot of communities is the catechumenate period really isn't a full catechumenate. It's an abbreviated catechumenate. And there are lots and lots of reasons for this. But what happens is there's a rite of acceptance celebrated sometime in the fall, usually in October or November. And so then at that rite of acceptance, all the inquirers become catechumens. And if there hasn't been a real discernment about their readiness, you know, they're just sort of put into the process because it's time. But there perhaps hasn't been a real discernment about their readiness to become catechumens. So they become a catechumen around mid-October, early November, and then we go through some sessions throughout November, but we take Thanksgiving off. Then we get into December, and of course everybody's busy in December with the holidays. And so December is a little bit lost, and even into January. Folks aren't really ready to come back right at the beginning of the new year. So maybe we're a couple of weeks into January before we start again. And then we've got 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 sessions, however long it is until Lent. And then Lent happens this coming year. Lent is going to be rather early, so the catechumenate will end kind of abruptly. And then we'll have the rite of election. And again, if there isn't a real discernment for readiness going on, then all of the catechumens are put into the rite of election, and then we have the 40 days, which is the Lenten time of retreat, and then they're baptized. And so all along there, they've had a rushed, abbreviated catechumenate, and we've never really taken the time to discern if they're ready to live the Christian lifestyle. And so in their mind, they've completed all the requirements to get their sacraments, and they have no other obligations. And so once they celebrate their sacraments at the vigil, then they don't really see the point of coming to Mass. It's not something that has been incorporated into their habit, into their framework, into their understanding of what it is to live a Christian lifestyle. So all that, if they're not coming back to Mass after the Easter Vigil, we really have to look back at the very beginning and say, how have we started the process? Because the way we start the process is going to have a huge impact on how the process concludes. And another solution to this, or another strategy to focus on getting the neophytes engaged in the Sunday liturgy, is to rely a lot more on the godparents. The godparents, that's a really important role. The godparents are supposed, especially in that first year after baptism, the godparents are really supposed to be the ones that shepherd these neophytes and root them into the community life. And the godparents are the ones that should be primarily responsible for getting the neophytes to the Sunday liturgy. Now, if your parish is like a lot of parishes, like my parish, in fact, godparents a lot of times aren't up to the role. Godparents sometimes live in another state or even another country. Godparents are not there in the day-to-day life of the neophyte to really help them in this growing process, in this new phase of their life during the mystagogical period. And so there's two things there. Again, as we said with the beginning of the process for the inquirers, we also have to look at the beginning of the process with forming the godparents and forming the sponsors. And we need to be discerning their ability to really do the role that they're called to do. Now, if that's just not possible because of cultural traditions or family expectations or whatever, and a particular catechumen just has to select a godparent who everybody knows is not going to be able to live out that role and function completely as we'd expect a godparent to, then what we need to do as catechumenate teams is find parish companions who can kind of stand in for the godparents, people who actually live in the parish that can fulfill the role of a godparent. So in Stephanie's parish, for example, someone like Stephanie could perhaps not be the sponsor or be the godparent for a particular neophyte, but knowing that this particular neophyte's godparents live in Vermont, Stephanie could take on the responsibility of making sure that neophyte got to Mass, at least for the first year of after their baptism, that Stephanie might take on some of the duties of the godparent to make sure that neophyte is rooted in the community in that crucial first year. So if any of you have any other strategies for making sure that your neophytes remain engaged after the Easter Vigil, go ahead and type those in, and we'll read those out and share. But these are just some that I've come up with looking at my own experience and also talking with catechumenate teams around the country and things that they've done. The biggest one of those three, I would say, is that readiness factor. If folks are not engaged after the vigil, it's because we haven't really discerned that readiness right at the beginning of the process and done ongoing discernment throughout the process. The next point I want to make about this period of mystagogy is if the Sundays of the Easter Vigil really are the primary place of post-baptismal catechesis, if that's the main setting for post-baptismal catechesis, then those 8 Sundays of the Easter season have to be the very best Sundays of the entire year. And we don't really think about them that way, huh? We feel a little worn out when we get to Sunday, especially if we're on the liturgy committee, if we're the pastor and we're charged with preaching for those 8 Sundays. We're kind of spent from Lent and the Triduum, and particularly Easter Vigil, and maybe Easter Sunday is a great big deal, and maybe even in really parishes that have it together, maybe the second Sunday of Easter, the lilies are still fresh and we might have a full choir. But after that, it seems to go downhill pretty quickly in lots and lots of places. So if we're going to focus on those 8 Sundays, some things to focus on, some things to pay attention to, I've listed here at the bottom of the slide. And I've done that somewhat in order, I think, somewhat in order of importance. And feel free to argue with me on this if you don't think this is the order, or if you think there are other things to focus on. But if we want to make those 8 Sundays the best of the year, I'd say the first thing we need to focus on is the music. The music has to be as full throughout for all the Sundays of Easter as it is on Easter Sunday. So, and I say that not necessarily in a performance mode. That's something that can happen on Easter Sunday. We get, the brass comes in and we get a full 4-part choir, and we get maybe we even hire somebody to come and play a special instrument or be a vocalist or something. We have a really big performance on Easter Sunday, and that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about music that the assembly can sing, that the neophytes can sing, that really has a sense of resurrection and uplift and fills people to the brim, and you feel like the Holy Spirit is just going to blow the roof off the place. That's the goal we're looking for in the music for every Sunday of the Easter season. And I'm not a musician myself, so it's difficult for me to give you specific advice on how to do this. But even any half-trained liturgical musician knows what we're talking about when we talk about this. And so getting there is just a matter of getting the right training and getting the right attitude about, we're not doing a performance, but we're doing music that people can really sing and really own. And you know it when you hear it. Even if you're not a musician, you know when you're in the pews on Sunday and everybody is into the song and they're all really just committing their hearts to it. And that's the sense we want, especially in the neophytes. So it has to be really almost, I don't want to say simple exactly, but singable music. It has to be music that is accessible to folks who may not have all the musical talent in the world like me. It's very easy for me to give up on a song if it gets to be too high or too tricky or too hard. But if it's easy for me to sing, I'm all there. A couple of the comments, folks are chiming in here about strategies for involving the neophytes. Don and Janet say, if the neophytes are married to a Catholic, the spouse should encourage the participation in the Mass and being engaged in the parish. And that's a great point, Don. We had, in my parish this year, we had a guy he's been married to a Catholic woman, a faithful Catholic woman, I think they've been married close to 10 years, 10 or 11 years. And so he's just now getting baptized. But she wasn't his sponsor, but boy, she's going to be sure that he's involved in the faith. And I think that's a terrific point. Luella says, through my experience of the RCA process 15 years ago, the most important for keeping me involved and excited was my sponsors. They were all faith-filled and active in the parish and made sure we had a close personal relationship. And Luella, I think you're just underlining my point about, the sponsors and godparents, we really need to discern their qualifications. And one huge qualification is they got to live nearby. They have to live in the parish and be excited about the faith and communicate that excitement to the neophyte. That's terrific. Thanks for sharing that. Carol says, the only thing I disagree with is that the Year A readings should be focused from doing this process for over 20 years. I find All the years are great for neophytes, and they need the experience of each year. Yeah, you're skipping down ahead to the bottom there, and as I said, Carol, I've done these kind of in priority order. So year A readings would be the lowest in the priority order there, and I put it in there to point out that we're all aware that during Lent for the scrutinies, we're required to use the year A readings for the scrutinies. During the period of mystagogy, the period of post-baptismal catechesis, the rite says that that these celebrations, these 8 Sundays of Easter, include particularly suitable readings in the lectionary. So the rite is saying that the lectionary has chosen readings that are particularly good for the neophytes to be hearing for every cycle, and then it goes on to say, especially the readings for year A. So that during this mystagogical period, the Easter season, the rite is not requiring that we use the A cycle readings as it does during the scrutinies. But it does say that when we are in year A, pay close attention, because these year A readings are particularly suitable, perhaps in a way that's a notch above the other cycles of the year. So let me go back to the priority list then. The next point I wanted to make, the second most important thing to focus on, I think, is preaching. And, you know, in my parish, I hope my pastor isn't on the line. Well, even if he is, I would tell him this anyway. My pastor is a really good preacher. But when we get to the Easter season, he preaches like he preaches throughout the rest of the year, which is really, really good, and that's a great thing. But I think what has to happen in the Easter season is that preaching needs to shift a little bit. So the preaching is done through the lens of the neophytes. You almost have to say, as a preacher, you have to say, how are the neophytes seeing all this happen for the first time, and what does that proclaim to us, the rest of us Catholics, as a worshiping community? And that's a slightly different style of preaching. It's called mystagogical preaching. You're preaching at it from the point of view of what is our institutional Catholic memory of this period, of these 50 days. What are the readings telling us about these 50 days? That's all kind of traditional preaching stuff. And then one added lens in there, what's the new vision that these neophytes are having of all of this? And what does that newness call all of us to, the neophytes and the old fights together? What's the new thing that we learn from this now, because these new shoots, these neophytes are in among us? And that's a little spin, a little twist on the preaching that has to happen. So if you are a preacher, or you can talk to your preachers about kind of looking into that, how that happens. And there's a couple of articles on our website, teamrci.com, about mystagogical preaching. It really is a fine distinction, but when you hear it, it really does change that preaching moment, and it is uplifting for the neophytes and helps root them in that Sunday assembly, because it's almost like the preaching is coming out of their own hearts when you do that, when you make that shift to preach through their eyes or their ears, preach at it as though they're seeing it or hearing it for the first time. It has a strong impact on them as new folks in the Eucharistic community. The next thing in level of importance there, I would say, is symbols. And symbols are, that's a tricky word for Catholics. If you went to Catholic grade school, and you're about my age, I'm in my mid-50s, you may have heard this from the sisters in your school as I did. And I don't know that they said it exactly this way, but this is how I heard it as a second and third grader, is the difference between Catholics and Protestants is Protestants only have symbols, and Catholics have the real thing. We have the real presence. And so for me, it was always a little bit, a little bit kind of off, or not quite correct for me to talk about symbols in the liturgy. Everything in the liturgy was real, and to talk about symbols was not really cool as a Catholic. And then when I went to school and studied liturgy, all the professors, all they were talking about was symbols, 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 symbols. And I, in my youth, I wanted to correct them. Say, well, Father, that's not quite right. Everything in the Mass is real. It's not symbolic. And, of course, then, after my first C in graduate school, I figured, well, I better get this right or I'm never going to get out of here. So what I came to understand was when we talk about symbols in the liturgy, we're not talking about things that are fake or things that are not real. We're talking about things that are so powerful, so mysterious, that we don't have any other way of describing them except taking something concrete from our daily lives and saying, God is this. God is water. God is fire. God is oil. And in saying that, that's a metaphor. That's a putting together of a common experience, a common thing, with a mysterious thing, with a thing that's beyond, a thing that's so powerful that it's beyond words for us. And one way that a lot of us can access this is if you think about one of the key symbols in the wedding rite is the wedding ring. So if you're married yourself, if you think about when you put that ring on your spouse's finger, what happened to that ring? What did that ring become for you in that moment? And a way to get to the answer to that question is to imagine losing your ring or talk to somebody who's actually lost their wedding ring. Can you ever replace that ring? You could go to the jeweler and get an exact copy of the ring, but it wouldn't be your wedding ring. It wouldn't be the very same thing because the ring was changed somehow. There was a presence, the presence of your love, of the wedding, of your promises, of the community witness. All that presence was in that original ring. And that ring then becomes a symbol of all of that. So the ring is not the marriage, the ring is not the love, but the ring somehow participates in the marriage, in the love that you have for each other, and is symbolic in that way. And so all of the artifacts, all of the gestures, all of the things that we do of the liturgy are symbolic in that way. They all participate in the love of God for God's people. So when you're looking at the symbols of the liturgy, if they're little or they're kind of artificial, like artificial lights instead of real fire, or a little dab of oil instead of a lot of oil, or a drip of water instead of immersing somebody, and so on. If you think about if the symbols are kind of shrunken and small, it's difficult to catechize from them. It's difficult to see the experience of Christ in them. It's not impossible, of course. A lot of us grew up that way. The way I was baptized was really minimal. It was a little bit of water. It was on a Saturday. It was just my parents and godparents and not the larger community. And yet, that baptism was effective. It's not about, did God happen? God happens even if we just do the minimum. But, it's not a contest. It's not like we should challenge God to shrink our symbols so small as a way of saying, well, hey, God, can you work through just this tiny amount? We should think of it the other way. How sensual, how grand can we make our symbols so they speak on multiple levels, in multiple ways, to multiple people from all kinds of experience? So the neophytes then, even in their beginner mode, can grasp the Paschal mystery, as we said before, can see the Paschal mystery, the love of God, the sacrifice in that symbol, and can see that, and then so can I, somebody who grew up Catholic and has studied Catholicism and been part of this church for my whole life. I can also grasp the Paschal mystery because the symbol speaks to me in a different way because it's so full and so rich. So in this Easter season, especially, we want to focus on making the symbols powerful and big and accessible. The next point to focus on is hospitality. And somebody said they didn't feel like their parent was very welcoming. And that's just so important, that hospitality, especially in this Easter season, is really, really powerful. The RCIA in those paragraphs I gave you says that we should welcome the neophytes with open arms. And think about that, what that would be like if every time the neophyte walked into church, they just experienced all these open arms, grabbing them, hugging them. Even folks that had never met before walk up to them, hug them, say, welcome, glad you're here. that sense of hospitality would be so overwhelming. So who could not come back if they experienced that kind of a welcome? So if your parish is itself not too welcoming, start with your team. Start with the 3 or 4 or 5 people you have direct influence with, and at least yourselves be that hospitable, welcoming community for the neophytes. And then as you go through the year, expand that out a little bit. Try to get 2 or 3 or more people, and keep expanding, so you're expanding that sense of hospitality throughout your entire community. The rest of the things that I've listed there, as I've said, they're important, but they're not as important. We want to focus on final dismissal, because part of this post-baptismal catechesis is getting the neophytes to do apostolic works, to live an apostolic lifestyle. And so maybe even like sing that dismissal, or at least rehearse it. Again, I realize this isn't up to most of you, but maybe you could have a conversation with the presider to really, make that final dismissal prayerful and powerful. And especially in the New Translation Roman Missal, I think that's one of the successes of the Missal. Some people complain about the translation, but one of the great benefits of the new Missal is those new dismissals and the way they're worded. They're really, really powerful, so take a look at those. We already talked a little bit about linking the neophytes and the godparents, and then give them a special place in the Mass, a special pew where they're seated, where they're identified, so folks recognize that they're there. The Rite even suggests that the neophytes might come to Mass in these 50 days in their white garments, so they're particularly identified in the community. And we already spoke about the Year A readings. So those are just some ways to focus on these 8 Sundays and make them the best of the year. Now, as I said, one of the objections is by the 2nd Sunday of Easter, we're exhausted. So one way to overcome that might be to focus on simple elegance. It doesn't take a lot of work to make the symbols stand out more. It doesn't take a lot of work to make the music that we can sing. You don't need a 4-part choir and a full orchestra. You just need music we can sing. So focus on simple elegance and be consistent. Make sure that every Sunday of Easter has that simplicity to it. Another thing is to focus on Easter Sunday and Pentecost as the high points. Easter Sunday can be a great big deal, and then you could scale down a little bit for the rest of the Sundays of Easter, and then ramp back up again for Pentecost, and make those like bookends to the seasons. That's another way to kind of overcome that. Okay, so let's look at another strategy for keeping the neophytes engaged throughout the season. We're gonna call this gathering the neophytes. But before I do that, I want to look at the comments here. John has another strategy for keeping the neophytes engaged. He says that the neophytes love to do welcoming. So, John, I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. Do you mean having the neophytes like at the doors welcoming folks as they come in, or do you mean something up at the microphone where they're welcoming folks? If you clarify that a little bit for me. I think having them at the doors might be a good idea if they feel comfortable doing that. In that way, they get to meet some more parishioners as they're coming in. And John also says the entire parish loves. Yeah.
Oh, and in fact, Nick, I went ahead and took John off mute. And John, if you're there, if you would want to comment on that. Oh, we're not hearing you. You might have us on mute on your end.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, and John said they love taking up the offertory gifts. That's another good suggestion.
Yeah.
A photo gallery of the neophytes after Easter Vigil. So, Stephanie, you said you have been involved on RCI teams. Is there anything that your parish has done in particular that, especially during the liturgy or as a link to the liturgy, that involves the neophytes more?
Well, I think a lot of these ideas about just getting them more involved in the actual liturgy themselves, finding ways in which they want to contribute and give up their talents. And I love the idea of the welcoming, having them part of the welcoming process.
Yeah. Yeah. Terrific. Okay, so let's look at some strategies, kind of beyond the liturgy. So other ways to gather the neophytes. One really important way, and I love parishes to do this, so you've probably experienced this, but if you haven't, I would really strongly recommend that you do this, that you gather the neophytes together, and other parishioners too. You wouldn't have to limit it to just the neophytes, but get a gathering of folks together that includes the neophytes, and do an extended mystagogical reflection on the Triduum, where you're really kind of looking back at the Triduum, and again, not for the purpose of evaluation, but kind of saying, what were the high points? What is it that I most remember? And here, start with the neophytes. Don't let the longtime Catholics chime in too much yet, because the neophytes will be a little shy, and they'll wait, they'll let the longtime folks hog the floor if we let them. But focus particularly on the neophytes, and what was powerful, what stood out for them during the Triduum, and especially at the Easter Vigil. And then ask them how they saw God in that moment. What was it that, why was that moment powerful, especially from the point of view of what they think God was saying to them and what they think God was doing to them in that moment. And then how they're different today because of having experienced that. And if you really take an extended time to do that, it's a really powerful moment for the neophytes. Then look at your ongoing parish faith formation processes. One thing, one challenge that somebody wrote in the comments at the beginning was, these have been part of this little RCIA community for all this time, sometimes longer than a year. Now we push them out into the larger parish, and they're just like everybody else. And sometimes there's no place else for them to go that is even somewhat similar to what they were experiencing in the RCIA, because we don't have much going on with faith formation in the parish. So look at what's going on with your faith formation processes. What kind of devotional practices do you have? What kind of prayer practices do you have? What kind of scripture study do you have? What's going on in the parish that you can get the neophytes gathered into and involved in? If there's not a lot going on in the parish in general, create some faith-sharing time with the godparents and the catechumenate team and the neophytes. Create some time when folks, and this wouldn't have to be every week, but maybe once a month throughout their neophyte year, maybe a few more times than once a month during that 50 days. Be creative, but think of some ways that you can just get together for faith share. And it doesn't have to be in a parish classroom and kind of all holy with the lights dim and candles. It can be like that if folks are into that. But this could be around pizza and beer, or it could be during some kind of a social activity that also includes some discussion of how things are going with our faith life. And this isn't just the neophytes reporting in, but the godparents and the catechumenate team also talking about their faith journey as well. Find ways to get the neophytes involved in what's going on with the apostolic works in your community. And this, I don't know why this seems like such a challenge, because almost every parish has some kind of a food pantry, or like my parish, they've got a whole group that goes to Tijuana over the summer to help build houses, or some kind of event that's going on. And I don't think I could get our neophytes to go to Tijuana necessarily, but I can get them to come to the car wash where we're going to raise money for Tijuana, things like that. So find some ways to involve the neophytes in the charitable works that are going on in your community. Don and Janet have written in a suggestion to encourage neophytes to get involved in some kind of small group, particularly a strength small group. This would help them become more engaged and find that they're called to do community or parish, and leads to fuller involvement. And I think that's a terrific suggestion. And Don or Janet or Stephanie, maybe one of you want to chime in and say more about what a strength small group is, or maybe everybody on the call knows what we mean by that.
Well, and I've just unmuted Don and Janet, and maybe Don, you can speak to that a little bit.
Sure, Stephanie.
Hi, Don.
Hi. Of course, I'm referring to Living Your Strengths and the strength development process that many of us are doing in our parishes now and what CSEC is involved in. And just to get the neophytes involved in some kind of a strengths process, whether it's a small group, which I would suggest because they can meet other people, form community and bonds, and also they learn about themselves. They find out how God made them and hopefully start to learn what their purpose is or what their calling in the parish is or just about in life. So that's what I was referring to. But I think it's a great thing if we could figure out a way to, it's non-threatening, you know, where they could come in and it's true of all parishioners, whether they're new ones or existing ones. But I think the new ones, it might be a way to get them to engage in the community and find some meaningful place for them, you know, something they can make a difference on. That's about it.
Yeah, that's terrific, Don. Thanks for sharing that.
Sure.
Carol's also written in that this year in their parish they're beginning something called Discovery, which is to encourage the neophytes to continue on, but also involves parishioners and old RCA people to come continue their mystagogical time. And I think that's a great idea, to try to get folks who've already been through the process to come back and get involved, and longtime parishioners as well. That sounds great. And then another strategy for the last strategy I want to talk about for gathering the neophytes outside the liturgy is to just encourage faith sharing at their family tables. And ideally, we would have been doing this throughout the catechumenate process, but now we can provide them with some simple faith sharing questions or starter thoughts that link their table to the Eucharist, because they're experiencing Eucharist for the first time. So especially in these 50 days, help them link that family meal to the parish meal as well. So some of the objections that I've heard about these kinds of suggestions are that we don't have much going on in our parish for adult faith formation. I kind of mentioned that already. And if that's the case, you know, don't give up on it. Keep trying to develop more stuff in adult faith formation in your parish. But for the immediate term, you can focus on that domestic church faith sharing around the table and give the neophytes some real support. And maybe the godparents can help with this by inviting the neophytes over for dinner once in a while to focus on, again, that linking the family table with the parish table. This we already talked about, that the neophytes sometimes drift away when they lose that intimacy of their tiny RCIA groups. And we need to start earlier to connect them with the community. So the rite says at the very beginning should be getting them invited into parishioner homes during the inquiry period, and then getting them invited into parishioner homes at different points throughout the catechumenate, and we should get them invited to parish activities and groups throughout the catechumenate, and then continue that during the mystagogical period. So again, we're getting them invited to dinner at folks' homes or barbecues or softball games or whatever's going on in your parish. Get them connected to the community and start early. Don't wait until their baptism to start doing that. So they don't feel like they're leaving their little group and going into this vast parish, but rather they're already integrated into the parish community by the time of their baptism. Mention them into homes and getting godparents to help out with this. And one thing we want to avoid is this is not really a time for ministry recruitment. I've talked to teams. Some of them have, like, you know, the first week after their baptism, they have a lineup of the heads of committees coming in to try to recruit for ministries, and that's just really not the right time for this. The first few months of their after their baptism should be a time of really just focusing on the Eucharist and not worrying too much about getting, you know, signing up to be a lector or signing up to be a catechist and so on. A couple of more comments have come in. Ingrid says that at our church we have one night after Easter Vigil where we offer a strength seminar, and we offer the journey 2 weeks after the end of the mystagogy, which has been a hit. That's great to hear, Ingrid. And Don says we're promoting Make Your Home a Holier Place. I'm not sure if everybody knows what that is. Let's see, Stephanie's comments. Okay, Luella says, I'd love to hear about making a home a holier place. So not everybody knows what that is. So John, if you could offer a little more background about that in the comments for folks to make use of, that would be terrific. Let's go on here. And the last point I want to make about engaging the neophytes is to celebrate milestones. This is kind of important. Toward the end of the Easter season, the rite says that we should have a party for the neophytes. So around Pentecost, it could be a little before Pentecost, doesn't have to be right on Pentecost, but you want to have some celebration to really mark this time. And then have a celebration at regular times throughout the year. Maybe once a month or so, have some kind of a gathering with the neophytes to check in and see how things are going. And then the rite says at the 1-year anniversary of their initiation, you should have a party. And this is similar to what, I forgot who said it now, that Carol said about where they have a process where they gather all the old RCI people to be with the neophytes. So at that 1-year anniversary, that doesn't have to be just the neophytes, but you can get all the past neophytes, all the past folks who've gone through the process as well. So all of these are strategies, ways to draw the neophytes in, engage them more in the community. And I want you to just reflect a little bit on what if we really did this. All of these strategies I really drew from those paragraphs that I told you about, paragraph 244 to 251 in the rite. And then I supplemented that a little bit with my own experience and the experience of teams I've talked to across the country. But it really, I think all of these suggestions are really true to the vision of what the RCI calls us to. And I want to ask finally, what if we did this kind of a thing? What if we did this kind of a process focused on the vision of the rite, focused on helping the neophytes grasp the fullness of the Paschal mystery by making those 8 Sundays of Easter, those 8 Masses of the Easter season, the primary place of catechesis in the post-baptismal period? How would your neophytes change? What would happen to them if we focused on them in this way? And how would the godparents change if we really asked them to step up and do the role that the rite expects of the godparents? How would your assembly change? How would your parish be different? If you did this, say that you kind of started this the little bit that you can with what we have left of the Easter season this year, and then you did it a little bit bigger next year, and a little bit more focused the year after that. And then after 5 years of really focusing on this post-baptismal period in this way, look back at your parish and what would you expect would be different in your parish? How would your parish have grown over that time? How would your parishioners have become more engaged and more committed to the Paschal mystery? And then how would your liturgies of Easter change? If you were really going to make those the best Sundays of your entire year, what would change in those Sundays? And how would this affect faith life at home? How would you carry over that enhanced vision of Sunday into the domestic church? And how would that make people more engaged in their family life, more engaged in their faith life in the domestic church? And as I said before, if we really look at this as the outcome, if this is the outcome we want, then how is that going to change the way we start the process? How is it going to shift the way we do discernment from the very beginning, when folks are very first inquiring about what it is to be Catholic? How is it going to shift the way we start things? And what else can you think of that might change? What else would go on in your own life, in your parish life, in your family life that would change because of all this? So here are some next steps that I want to outline for you. Some next things that you can do that I hope are kind of practical. One is you can evaluate the discernment process, and even if you're not part of the RCA team, even if you're not on staff, you can begin to evaluate this discernment process. And if you're clear in your own mind about how we should begin and some of the things we should be discerning as we go along, then when you're in parish meetings or when you have coffee or you encounter someone who has some influence over the discernment process, you can offer an informed opinion about what you think ought to change. Then Another thing I mentioned is to focus on those Sundays of Easter. And again, even if you're not on the liturgy committee, you can start to think about this Sunday when you go to Mass. Look at just one thing you can improve about Sundays. Look at something, one of the symbols of the Mass that you can improve, or one suggestion you could make about the preaching, or one suggestion you can make about the music. And start in your own mind, even if you don't have any direct influence over it right now, begin to think critically about what could be better about those Sundays of Easter. Calendar now, this is really more for the RCI team or people on the team. Begin to put into the calendar significant dates in your own calendar. Get it into the parish calendar, and be sure calendars of folks, even when they're in the inquiry stage. If it looks like we're going to be moving them into the rite of acceptance, make sure that these Sundays of Easter are on their calendar, even if they're not going to be baptized for another year, year and a half or so. And then begin to, again, this is a little bit more for the RCI team itself, but begin to develop a stronger preparation program for the godparents and sponsors. We'll really ask them to step up and really ask them to be really involved and engaged in the lives of their candidates and catechumens and neophytes. And then this can be for the whole parish, for wherever you are in parish life. Begin to evaluate that ongoing adult faith formation in your parish process. What can you do to enhance that? What can you do to make something attractive happen that the neophytes will want to be involved in after their baptism? And finally, get some resources. So I'm going to give you some resources here that you can find on our website, teamrca.com. And if other folks have other ideas of resources, go ahead and type those in the comments box. So first of all, I want to tell you about this process called Faith, Life, and Creed. These are downloadable PDFs that cover every Sunday of the liturgical year. And what it is a faith-sharing process for based on the readings for every Sunday. And then this Faith, Life, and Creed process links those Sunday readings with multiple doctrinal teachings of the church and ways that we can live the Christian lifestyle. And what you would do as a leader of this process is you would kind of read ahead about some of those links, and you would say, all right, I want to link to, say, the doctrine on resurrection based on the readings for this Sunday and where I know my faith sharing group is. We're going to link to, I want to link to the doctrine on the resurrection. And then you download a complete sort of a mystagogical process style teaching on resurrection. So basically you would be flowing from the Sunday liturgy, the Sunday readings, into a kind of a discussion, a kind of a outline of how we're going to live out the resurrection as Catholics in this parish. And that process can be used with catechumens, it can be used with neophytes, it can be used with longtime Catholics. So, and there's a free sample of that available on the website, teamrca.com, that you can take a look at. And everything on our website is a money-back guarantee, too. So if you buy the whole process and you decide it's not working, you can just ask for your money back, too. So there's no risk to you. The next resource I want to tell you about is one that Stephanie mentioned at the beginning, and it is the book that I wrote for catechumenate teams to help them grasp all these ideas that I've been talking about in mystagogy, but also the entire catechumenate process. How do you form a team? What does the team do after you form the team? What do we do during the period of inquiry? How do we do the discernment, the ongoing discernment that I've talked about? What happens in the pre-catechumenate period, the catechumenate period, the post-baptismal period? What happens during the rites? How do we rehearse? How do we shape and rehearse a rite of acceptance? How do we do the rite of sending for election? How do we do the scrutinies? How do we celebrate the sacraments of Easter Vigil? All that stuff is covered in the book. It's sort of like everything I've learned by having been doing this since I was in my 20s. and having talked to people all across the country, I tried to get it into a book. So again, you can find that on our website, teamrca.com. And then I wrote this book, The Heart of Faith, for the catechumens and candidates, because one thing that I discovered is a lot of teams are pretty good at teaching folks the doctrine. But, you know, I grew up Catholic and I learned the doctrine. I went to Catholic grade school, but like Stephanie said, I really didn't get it about what being Catholic was till I was 17. I really didn't get what the heart of being Catholic was, what the passion of being Catholic was. And so I tried to write this book from that point of view. What is it that really excites me, that fills my spirit about being Catholic? And I tried to write that in really simple language for catechumens and candidates who are just beginning this process. And then one thing that you may, if you know about Team RCIA, you may not know about this website, faithfieldguide.com. We started that as a website sort of for the seekers and also for the neophytes. And so this is just kind of, it's sort of an extension of the Heart of Faith, and takes it maybe one step further, where we start explaining why we have some of the teachings that we have in the church. So what Catholics mean by the Bible, and what we understand about the Bible, how Catholics pray and what we understand about prayer, and things like that. And one thing that I think is kind of cool on that website is we have a 5-session e-course on making Mass matter. So if you've got neophytes, for example, who are just now experiencing the fullness of the Mass for the first time, you can send them to faithfieldguide.com. They can sign up for this free e-course, and they'll get, I think it's, they'll get 5 emails over the course of 6 or 7 weeks that help them go more deeply into the heart of the Mass, the power of the Mass. And then another resource is me. You can always email me, and I'm happy to chat with you and talk with you more about what you're doing in your community, and we can brainstorm together ways that you might try different things and try new things. And on our website, we've got just a ton of free articles and free resources. And in particular, linked to this topic, we've got a whole section dedicated to mystagogy. So if you go to teamrca.com/category/mystagogy, you can find a whole bunch of things there on the topic we've been talking about. And just to check in again over on the chat page, you can see there that Jennifer has mentioned, she mentioned Faith Life Creed. Great, thanks for that, Jennifer. And John has mentioned stuff by John Roberto. John Roberto's stuff is great. I would second that you should take a look at his stuff. And Carol has said Team RCI and also RCL resources. And I'm not as familiar with RCL as I am with John Roberto, but I hear good things about RCL, and so I'd encourage you to go look at that as well. So that is kind of everything I've come to tell you today about mystagogy, and I'm really thankful that you spent this time. But most of all, I want to thank you for the work you do in your parishes, because I know that you're just overpaid and get too many thanks all the time. No, I know that's not true. And so that's why I want to say thanks for your dedication, your commitment to all of this, because you really are kind of the forefront of all this ministry. Even if you're not directly involved in RCIA, I know you're all involved in faith formation and helping people to live stronger lives as Catholics, and to bring Jesus more powerfully into the world who haven't heard the good news yet. So thanks, everybody, for your time and your commitment.
Thank you, and thank you, Nick, for this wonderful presentation and all of these amazing ideas and strategies, and certainly all the resources. And I want to thank all of you for coming today to this session. And also, just again, the plug for CSEC, because a lot of this is going to be posted. The recording will be posted on CSEC. If you aren't a member, we encourage you to become a member. We are offering these CSEC live sessions. We're trying to do this monthly or every other month. And I do want to plug our next one, which is in June. And it is going to be Al Winsman, the author of Growing an Engaged Church, along with Father Bill Hansen, who is one of the case studies written up in that book. They will be coming on and offering our next CSEC Live on June 15th, titled Measuring the Seemingly Immeasurable, talking about Gallup's research in engagement in faith communities, and then sharing the St. Gerard Magellan story. So if you haven't heard it, it's a mini summit about engagement in our faith community. So we hope you can join us then for that. And again, if you are a member of CSEC, you will get all of these flyers and information on an ongoing basis. The other thing I want to do, for those of you still with us, I want to share a file with you that Nick wanted to make available to everyone, and it's a handout that you can download right onto your desktop. So you should see right here on the screen a file transfer box, and if you click on that file and you hit download, that will download right to your computer. And it's a handout that just, again, covers everything that he mentioned today that hopefully will be helpful for you in your RCIA program and processes. So with that, again, we thank you, and we will send you off to enjoy a wonderful and blessed weekend. And thank you again for joining us.